Welcome to the Business SOS podcast. This is Rich Sierra, president of the Florida Small Business Legal Center. This is now episode 100 of Business SOS. I'm very excited to finally arrive at this point. I know I've been talking about that for the last few weeks, that we're getting closer and closer to episode 100. We finally arrived. So before I start, I certainly want to thank you for listening to me for the last 2 years and following in Apple Podcasts and Spotify, wherever you enjoy your shows, and also watching my YouTube videos that also have the podcast. We have, now close to 18,000 subscribers in our YouTube channel. Our podcast continues to grow, and I'm truly very proud of this accomplishment as we continue to provide you helpful information, especially to business owners, and how to navigate the challenges that you face in your small business. So I certainly want to thank you for your support for the last 2 years, and I'm certainly looking forward to having the next 100 episodes as we start the following week. But let's go ahead and start with the show. I'm very excited for today's topic, and I'm very excited for today's guest. Today's topic is building a business that outlives you. Why estate planning matters for business owners. And I have a special guest with me today. It is my friend and colleague, AJ Yolofsky. He's a founder and managing attorney of Yolofsky Law. AJ focuses his practice on business law, estate planning, and asset protection and wealth management. He's a former U.S. Marine Corps officer. AJ brings a mission-driven strategic approach to helping entrepreneurs safeguard their business and legacies. AJ, first of all, welcome to the show, and thank you for your service.
Thank you so much, Rich. It's a pleasure to be here, especially for episode 100. Congratulations. That's fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm very excited that you are my guest today. So before we start, tell me a little bit more about your practice.
My practice focuses on business owners. And when I set this up, I looked at estate planning, and this is a huge field. And so I narrowed it to work with business owners because it was easy to work with people like me. Right. And what concerns do we have? And when I started realizing, I dug into the facts that so many business owners have their wealth tied up in their business, it seemed like a huge opportunity.
So what inspired you to start that practice? I know you were doing business litigation before. Well, what made you transition to let me focus on this?
I transitioned my practice away from litigation and to focus solely on the transactional matters when my ex-wife was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. And I realized I needed more control over my life. And you know how the court schedule is, it can get a bit out of control.
Yes.
The other thing is that, I hate to admit it, here we are, 2 professionals, young kids, married for years, and we didn't have a plan. And so here we are facing one of the possibly worst things that could happen to a family. And I realized I'm not the only one. And so how can I help other people learn from my experience? Fortunately, she's okay. She's doing well. Great mom.
Okay. I'm glad to hear that. So what do you think that many business owners overlook estate planning?
Simple. It's part invincibility, and it's really part of you're out building the business. And one of the advice we get in entrepreneurs, you've probably heard this, get to market as soon as possible, build the business, build the revenue, do the things that are necessary. In a lot of cases, some people, it's put food on the table, right? Pay the next mortgage payment, rent payment. And estate planning is one of those things they don't think about.
Let me backtrack a second, just for the benefit of our listeners. What is estate planning?
Estate planning it has a bad name because people think about it. I don't need that until I'm eligible for Social Security. And the answer actually is estate planning provides a foundation for the business owner to build on. It's making decisions if you can't make them for yourself. So are you incapacitated? Or as we saw in COVID, what if you're stuck out of the country? What if you're stuck on a cruise ship? We had all those ships out on the coast of Fort Lauderdale, Miami, etc. Something has to replace it, because I'll tell you, and as you know, the last thing you want is the court to step in or the state to step in and make those decisions for you.
So give me an example of a big picture perspective for a business owner that is thinking about estate planning. What would you look at?
So we're going to look at their family structure, right? Their assets, their business documents, and also the key people in their business. One of the surprising things that people be operating for years, their business, and say they have a key person office manager, general manager, et cetera, hey, I need to send a wire to the bank, but the business owner can't do it. Well, the bank's not going to honor that wire without documentation. So estate planning is as simple as who is going to make the decisions for you if you can't make them for yourself.
And what are the risks that a business owner takes without any type of plan for succession, for example, if he or she is not available to run that business, or incapacitated or passes away?
One of the surprising things that people don't realize, and I hear this from so many business clients who say, oh, if something happens to me, my wife, my husband, my spouse, whatever, they'll just sell the business or they'll continue to operate it. And that's the money that they'll live on. And unfortunately, we've seen in our practice when someone is trying to rely on that, the business can get devalued by 90% in many cases because that key person, that owner, is the one instrumental to making the business work, whether from knowledge or relationships.
And that is true. And I see that. I do in my practice a lot of, buy-sell transactions, as you know, and, many times they need the owner to stay there for 1 or 2 years. And the idea, especially in a small business, that if you leave, the business will have the same value. That's just not true.
It is not true at all. I'm also a certified exit planning advisor. And we know that owners, the value of the business, if it's tied up with that owner, if that owner is no longer there, that business is worth a fraction of what you think it is, regardless of what the numbers are.
Yeah, and that is true. So is there any different, obviously there is, but what is the difference between business succession planning versus, estate planning, for example?
They're very similar.
Okay.
Estate planning is really focused on a person's family, right? Their assets. Where do they want all their assets to go? So not only the business interests, but also bank accounts, investment accounts, retirement accounts, life insurance, those types of things. Business succession planning is about how does the business continue to operate if that owner isn't there? What's the line of succession? So it could be the owner, general manager, office manager. And now you have people who can make decisions. When you have multi-member businesses, right? So 2 business partners, 3 business partners. Now we're talking about who is going to operate that business if one of the members, and we look at it in 5 Ds: death, disability, divorce, disassociation, or distress. And that stunned, like that deer in the headlights look when I'm meeting with people is, oh, we're good. We make all the decisions together. Sure. I look at the other 2 partners and I just say, do you want to be in business with their spouse if something happens to this person? And that stops. That's the mic drop moment. Mm-hmm. And people haven't thought about it.
So what can a business owner do to avoid that?
Plan. Okay. Plan. Get ahead of it. And the way to get ahead of it is to have the hard conversations up front. That means talking about, hey, if you get divorced, what's that going to look like? And put it in writing. Figuring out formulas for buyouts if you pass away. So we might have a situation where you have from parent to child. So parent wants to retire, wants to get bought out by the child. I have this situation right now where we're working through this succession planning. And so dad happens to be one of the main business creators and holds a specific license. Son is on his way up in the business, building his own relationships, growing it in his own way, and is transitioning the license. Now we've got to figure out that value. It makes for some tough conversations. It makes for a very interesting holiday time.
Yes.
Do it now because, Rich, how much does it cost to go to litigation these days?
A lot of money.
And what happens if, wait, you're supposed to be interviewing me.
Yes, yes.
Right? But what happens when you go to litigation and it costs money? Yeah. And what happens when you have that strong emotional component between family members that feel wronged?
It costs even more.
Exactly. So let's have those hard conversations up front.
What happens, we deal with a lot of professionals in South Florida. If there's a business that requires a licensed professional like attorneys, accountants, CPAs, for example, physicians, how does the succession planning, if at all, can be done?
that gets into some really interesting curves. And for lawyers, oh boy, do we have some challenges
here. It's a different
here.
podcast in itself.
It's a whole, it's a whole different conversation. Yes. And we might need a bar ethics attorney sitting with us to say, no, you can't say that.
Yes.
When you have a licensed professional, as a general rule, you need to succeed the company with another licensed professional, right? That is, so we think about, say, a general contractor, right? Construction, easy. Spouse could continue the business provided that a licensed individual now joins the business or becomes contracted to join the business and qualify. When you get into those specific professions you mentioned, it gets more challenging, right? You have to then have not only somebody who is going to be able to hold that license, but let's look at a physician. What about their personality? What about their relationship with patients? Because this is another value proposition that people overlook, is if I'm bringing someone in who's going to continue my business, say as a physician, and you have a general practice where you're meeting with patients all the time, what happens if your patients don't like the person that you chose as a successor? Now what?
Yeah.
Right? So we get into these and it's a more detailed example.
Have you had a situation you may have that a business just ceases to exist because of lack of succession planning?
Actually, most businesses end because of a lack of succession planning. I'll give you an example from our community, from the legal community, back about 2008. There was a established international law firm that was based at the Trade Center in Miami. Had the top floor, about 70 lawyers, multi-million-dollar practice, work all over the world, all kinds of clients, litigation, transaction, you name it. And one day in 2008, the founder and sole owner passed away, died, done. That ended the firm that day. There were no other owners. There was no succession plan in place. All 70 or so lawyers were left in the lurch, right? They're scrambling what to do. And the courts, interestingly, said that all the clients that the firm was representing were no longer represented because that firm no longer existed.
Interesting.
And it created a several months, if not a couple of years, of just disaster. As people scrambled, there were turf wars, there were client wars, people trying to, oh, that's my client, but I was doing the work. You get those types of situations.
Yeah. And so one of the things that surprised me the most when I talk to business owners, and I do a lot of partnership disputes, it's a good part of my practice, that they do not have an operating agreement. How important is that?
Well, as we say in the estate planning world, if you don't have a plan, the state has one for you. If you don't have them, let's clarify, right? So for an LLC, it's an operating agreement. For a partnership, it's a partnership agreement. And for a corporation, it's a shareholders agreement, right? And these terms are important because there's, as we know, some sketchy information out there on the internet. If you don't have it and you have two partners, then you have 50-50. And we all know 50-50 is deadlock. No one is better than the other.
Correct.
The statutes don't, the Florida statute or wherever your state someone is organized in, wherever you're listening, there are default rules, and those default rules then step in, and nobody likes those.
Yeah. So, and also, I deal with a lot of LLCs, and I see sometimes poorly written operating agreements that do not have the right provisions, and they have no succession planning of any kind. And so what happens if there's one that says, okay, my spouse will take over the shares?
Okay.
I just want to basically bring to the audience the potential consequences of not having the proper language in those agreements and not having a plan and the litigation that can ensue. You deal with this more on a daily basis than I do. So I want you to give us some examples of that.
So an example of that, so I was working with another attorney on a succession plan for an estate planning client of hers. It was an auto body shop. They did most of their business. It was the one guy, he had a garage and he got contracts from local dealers. Real simple. My wife will take over if something happens. His estate plan was never finished. He was talking about maybe selling the business to someone else, right? For, I think, mid six figures, right, around 400,000, I think it was. And he also up and passed away one day. Well, the value of the business went from that about $400,000 of a potential sale down to about $20,000, which was the value of the equipment. And so the wife was completely left in the lurch, and she was ready to find somebody to work in the business if she had to. And it just failed. And so when we look at this, whether it's partners, whether it's members, whether you have somebody someone's an investor and the other person is the service person, whatever it is, these sort of default situations, like just watch the business value disappear.
I've had situations in which you have two partners, and then the shares of one of the partners is in both the husband and wife's name.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
What happens when the partner dies?
Oh, it keeps
I'm throwing a lot of curveballs.
Yeah, no, these are great, because I think one of the strangest things, and you get this in your practice too, is, well, what do you typically do? Well, when I meet the typical person, I'll tell you. I haven't met them yet.
Yeah.
So when ownership, and there are good reasons for estate planning purposes to have that ownership in spouses' names, especially here in Florida. So the default, if ownership is owned by spouses and one spouse passes away, then the default is that full interest, however much it is, goes to the surviving spouse. However, in an agreement, we can specify, we can require a forced buyout at a certain value. We can set up membership to say, hey, these are, say, voting interests and these are non-voting interests. So we can do these things, but that's if you've done an agreement. If you've not done an agreement, well, the statute doesn't allow for that. The default rules don't allow for it.
For the benefit of our listeners, what is a forced buyout?
A forced buyout is simply that a person must, usually it's, the person to whom the buyout is required is forced to sell their shares to the company or forced to sell their shares to the other owners. They cannot continue. And so with this, it's a couple steps. It's not only the forced buyout clause, it's also requiring a vote or a consent of the other owners that the person to whom the buyout is being forced cannot participate in the ownership or operations of the company.
And I've seen agreements that sometimes the spouse signs, sometimes they don't. Would the spouse have to consent to this?
In Florida, it is the better practice to have them consent. It's not required.
Okay. So I've seen some of them.
Yeah. Other states, it is required. And where there's some overlap is when you have what could be what's called a testamentary disposition. I don't like using technical terms, but where it's what would happen if I pass away? And to make something valid in Florida on a testamentary disposition, 2 witnesses are required. So if you're going to have that document, have two witnesses watch the person do it.
And you mentioned also the term voting interest.
I'm sorry?
A voting interest.
Avoiding.
A voting interest.
Voting interest, sure.
Yes. In terms of limiting the voting interest for a surviving spouse, that has to be part of the agreement.
Correct.
So for example, if the spouse becomes the new member or the new partner in the company, can there be a provision that says, okay, you can become a member, but you're not going to vote on anything. You're a non-voting member. You'll get distributions whenever we decide to have distributions.
Correct. And so what will happen there is you want to set up the company in the first place let's talk about an LLC as an example. You want to set that company up as a manager-managed LLC rather than what many people do is like, oh, just set it up member-managed. Manager-managed, the managers run the company and will have more control. When you have member-managed, that won't work. So there are things that need to be done in that agreement to link it all together.
Okay. And I think it is important. One of when I do my operating agreements, I send a questionnaire. I send a questionnaire, fill it out, and I'll send you a first draft, second draft. You both have to be in agreement. If you have any questions, let me know. But I think they have to go through those conversations. And sometimes it happens that they just don't do the agreement.
That's true. That's true.
Decide to give up and say, no, we don't agree on these terms, but we're going to still continue working together.
Well, so it's interesting. I was actually looking at this issue the other day in Florida statutes. And in the revised Limited Liability Company Act, there is a provision that says an operating agreement can potentially be valid even if it isn't signed. So it's buried at the beginning of the statute in the definitions and what an operating agreement is. So I think for someone like you as a business litigator, what kind of curveballs would that create? Well, you drafted it. You went through drafts 1 and 2. Here are your emails saying, even though you never signed it, maybe that does work against them.
Yeah.
Somebody. Dangerous for sure.
Yeah. It is a litigation nightmare.
Yeah. It's tough. This is LLCs, limited partnerships, corporations. These are sophisticated tools. And the DIY or non-professional proliferation of people getting in there and saying, oh, we can do it for you. Right? Oh, I'm a former paralegal. I can set that up for you. It creates nightmares down the road. Like anything, do it at your own risk.
Yes. It's interesting you mentioned that. And I think episode 99 of my podcast, I went over the dangers of utilizing, templates, downloading forms from the web or even AI generated forms, for business documents, for business contracts, especially operating agreements and partnership agreements. And we can go through war stories, both of us, and a full entire day. But I give an example of one that, unfortunately, this couple was going to take over a restaurant in South Florida. They wanted me to do a management agreement. And I said, I quoted them the rate. They said, no, they don't want to do it. That's fine. No problem. They went ahead and did it, downloaded a form from the web. And 6 months later, they called me. And I felt terrible for them. And I said, what happened? Well, the owner did not pay the lease of the restaurant. And we got evicted and we have equipment in there. And when I look at the agreement that they signed, it had a AAA arbitration, which is astronomical, had all these provisions, and they lost everything. And so, the question that I put, what is this worth to you? How much money you're planning to make in the lifetime of this business? You're going to be making $500,000 a year for the next 10 years. I mean, for example, or you're going to grow the business. It's worth a few $1,000s to get a proper agreement that you can enforce or protect you. So that's the decision they have to make.
You're absolutely right. 2 really quick follow-ups to that.
Yeah.
The first, I had somebody reach out to us last year, booked an appointment. They said, we have a first draft of an operating agreement. We'd like to use it as not the template. We'd like you to use it to build what we want. Okay, that's reasonable. Get it, look at it. It's one of my agreements. It actually is my agreement because I put metadata into all of mine to track this stuff. And sure enough, it was mine. I let them know. I was like, well, thank you very much. I feel really good about that. The second is, a long time ago, we did some analysis and also based on my time as a commercial litigator. If you go it alone at the beginning, right? So the situation you just described, for that couple to sort things out, it would probably take, if they went to court, probably 2.5 years? So 30 months?
At least 24 months.
Yeah. Right. So we were riffing off of a popular sports documentary show, 30 for 30, right? 30 months. And 30 times what it's going to cost you to get it done right in the first place. Okay. So that's not really a good ROI for those business people out there. No,
it's just and unfortunately, listen, business owners are problem solvers by nature. Yes. And that's the reason we both went into business, because we like, we're problem solvers, we're creative. We feel that we provide good value for our customers. So we like to do things ourselves. I mean, we're guilty of that. I'm guilty of that. So I understand them trying to do some things themselves, and I think the analogy I have is like, listen, try to give yourself a haircut. It's not going to come out well, or you go to a barber to get it done properly. How many conferences have we been at together? A lot. Right. And I really like the way that you go outside the industry, outside the legal industry, to go to conferences, see what's being said in other places. And at these entrepreneur conferences, we hear so often, do what you're good at, outsource everything else. Correct. Yes.
And that DIY concept is not outsourcing. It's not outsourcing it to AI. It's not outsourcing it to a template. You're trying to do it yourself. when your own advice as business owner is, oh, I'll just outsource everything I don't do. Well, bring us in, right? That's the time to get in touch with us.
Correct. Yes. And you should have a professional do it, especially something as important as estate planning and business succession. You have to have a professional do it for you.
Yes.
It's okay to look for information, educate yourself so you can ask the right questions. But as the way I look at templates, and there's some good templates out there, it's a starting point, but should not be your final product.
I just ask people, I say, have you ever customized your order at a coffee shop or at a restaurant? Have you ever taken something, asked the chef to remove an item from your dish? Mm-hmm. Well, if the answer is yes, then a template is probably not for you.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that people have to be careful, but I did a whole podcast on that for that same reason. One question to have, what if you have your small company, one or two people, shop or business, how do you do succession planning in this case?
Well, what are the two, if you have two people, when you say two people, do you mean two owners? Or
two owners or just one owner and then you have assistants and then you have people that help employees?
Well, probably someone who is a single owner business, right? Their owner employee. What's their vision? What are they doing this for? What do they want to eventually do? A lot of those businesses, maybe they could be bought, right? But most likely that business is probably going to end when that owner retires. If you have one or two employees, something small like that, it could be a lifestyle business in which one of the employees might want to buy you out. It really starts with, what is the owner's goal for the business? Sometimes it's just, hey, I got to make rent next month. Sometimes it's, I want to dominate an industry and I'm starting from my kitchen table. And how many success stories are there out there with that?
Very few.
Right. Those are unicorns. It still begins with, well, where do you want to end up? That begin with the end in mind that we're so familiar with from Stephen Covey.
Yeah. I think in my opinion, I think if a business owner, if it's a business that, that you are the, like law firms are a perfect example, that that if you are the product, at some point, if you leave, whether you die or you retire, that business, you're not going to have the same business. Is it okay for them to say, at a certain point, I might sell it?
Yes.
Is that part of the exit plan?
Absolutely. There's there really are three types of exit transactions at core. There's third party buying a business, which is, we hear about that in the M&A context. Internal key players buying the business. So next generation, whether that's professionals or whatnot, and that's a management buyout. The third, for certain companies that it's appropriate, would be an ESOP, an employee stock ownership program. The fourth option is the one that people really don't like to talk about, which is the death or disability, or just it just ends, like they run out of money kind of thing. So there's three good ways to exit. There's one category of not so good ways.
So is it okay for a business owner to say, I'll do this for 15 years. I'll, make the money that I can make, invest it, save it, whatever I want to do with it. Then at a certain point, I'll just sell it.
Exit planning is good business planning. The idea of, I'll just sell it. There's a client of mine who has for years said, I get offers every week for $20 million. So that sounds great, right? It sounds awesome. When I went in and looked at the internals, it was maybe going to be 7 million, maybe. And then some other circumstances happen. We've done an even more detailed look at everything. That 7 million is a pipe dream, but we're working on fixing it. The reality is if someone wants to exit statistically, it's going to take, if they're not ready, it's going to take about 12 to 18 months to get them ready to sell the business. Because the flip side of this is, I can sell it tomorrow. Sure. Are you ready, business owner, for someone like me or you to come in and go through absolutely everything, or our peers in accounting, finance, insurance, right? To go through the guts of this thing.
One of the things I just recently advised a client that was thinking about selling the business. And I said, well, I recently why, and they, maybe they just want to move on and they have grown the company as far as they can. And I said, well, are you familiar with due diligence? They said no. And I said, okay, the analogy I can give you is like, when you're going to sell your house, you live in your house and you have that little scratch in the wall. I said, fine, I'll fix it later. Something, might not be perfect. I'll fix it later. So you can live with it. However, you're going to sell your house, then you have to look at everything. You want to basically go ahead and paint the walls. You want to make sure that the screen door closes correctly. If there's any holes around the house, you want to patch them. You want to make sure everything is done well and it's properly fixed before you bring somebody in to look at your property or look at your home. So the business is no different. So I have this 4-page due diligence checklist that I give to my clients that I said, before you put your office, your business for sale, go through this list and make sure everything is ready.
Yes.
And in fact, I've done a couple of episodes about due diligence and buying or selling your business. And because it's going to increase the value of your business. One of the things that I see in buy-sell agreements that the deals don't go through is that the seller takes too long providing documents.
Yes.
And that's a red flag.
Yes, it is.
Right off the bat. If you go with a business broker and then you have your business broker contract and then you say, okay, we have this list of documents, your tax returns for the last 3 years, bank statements, statement of cash flow, your financials, profit and losses. We'll begin with that. There's a lot more, but we'll start with that. We're on an extension. Okay. We have a problem.
Yeah. Tax returns. I'm glad you brought that up because the truth really is in the tax returns. And I know that could be used in so many different areas. Most business owners, especially those that are sub 5 million in revenue and even those sub 10 million in revenue, they're running so much of their life through their business. How can I take a business expense? How can I get a deduction? And they're playing not games, but they're doing things in such a way to expense everything and depress the taxable value every year, especially if they're taxed as an S corporation. And the reality is when you go to sell, now all of a sudden your numbers are depressed because you've been pushing all these expenses. And so the next thing is we go back and on the due diligence side, when I'm representing a buyer, we're putting stuff back in and we're saying, hey, wait a second, right? Like you've been taking all these expenses through the business. This is the actual value, right? And so if we want to replace you, now we have to take out, all right, we're not paying for all those things. And it starts adjusting the value of the business. And so for everything you just described, it is far easier to get your business systems running more efficiently and cycling faster in a way to increase the multiple, right? If you've talked about this on acquisitions, where the value of the business goes at a higher multiple rather than bringing the expenses down or bringing the revenue up. There's some math that goes behind this, but essentially we hear out in the world, oh, this industry, it sells at a 5 to a 7 multiple, right? Or for a personal service business, it might be 1 or 1.5 multiple.
Yeah.
So if you can get that multiple from 1 in your service business to 2, right? How much more have you done? And that comes from working on the internals, everything you just mentioned, documentation, tax compliance, financial statement, not necessarily audits, but done on time. These are the things that are going to help your business.
Yes. We have a few more minutes. So what can businesses do to prepare if they want interested in selling their business? Or what can they do?
If you want to sell your business, 2 things. Number 1, get with your trusted advisor first and have that conversation, right? Talk with them. Second, go home, grab a journal and write down what the reasons are that you want to exit and start getting specific about it. You want to exit at a certain time, at a certain price, with a certain take home and everything else. Now that conversation between what you just learned from your advisor and what you just learned from yourself is going to position you for the rest of the conversations that are coming up.
Yeah. AJ, do you have time to stay longer to have more about this?
Absolutely, Rich.
Okay, so before we end the episode, how can people find you?
Real easy to find me because I have a very simple last name. It is, there's only so many letters. It's 8 letters. It's really easy. So it's AJ Yolofsky. It's YOLOFSKY law.com. You can reach us by phone, 954-237-4011, or by email at hello at yolofskylaw.com.
Okay. We'll make sure we have your information in our show notes as well.
Sounds great.
Both in the podcast and also on YouTube. And as I close the show, again, I want to thank everyone for your support. This is episode 100. I want to thank AJ Yolofsky for being my guest today. I'm very proud that.
Thank you so much, Rich.
I appreciate your friendship and all your support.
Thank you for your mentorship.
Yeah, thank you for being here today. And if you want to reach me, my email is rich@richsierra.com. If you want to learn about our legal services, my website is floridaSmallBusinessLegalCenter.com. If you want to watch this podcast on YouTube, it's youtube.com/@RichardSierra. Again, if you are following our podcast in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, appreciate a 5-star review. Follow us and share it with your friends. Until next week, this is Rich Sierra. Remember that my goal is to help you succeed.